Welcome to Lotus Light Teachings, a space where we explore deep, transformative insights about life, self-discovery, and personal freedom. Today, we're going to talk about something many fear but few truly understand. What happens when the world stops caring about you as you grow older? Is it a curse? Or is it, in fact, the most liberating experience of your life? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll see this loneliness in a completely new light. One that could change your life forever. Let me ask you something. If no one was watching, no one was judging, and no one was keeping score, what would you do differently? Would you finally start that passion project you've put off for decades? Would you stop apologizing for being yourself? Would you finally start living on your own terms? Here's a truth that's both painful and freeing. People stop caring about you as you age. Your friends grow distant. Your family gets busy. Society shifts its attention elsewhere. And one day you might wake up realizing you are no longer a priority in anyone's life. At first, this realization stings. Feels like rejection, like a loss of worth. But what if I told you that this is your greatest opportunity? Because when the world stops paying attention, something powerful happens. Heavy check mark, you are free. Heavy check mark, you can take risks. Heavy check mark, you can finally live without seeking approval. And that, my friend, is a level of freedom that most people never get to experience. But before we dive in, let me tell you a story. One that might just change how you see your future. Helen was 70 years old when she realized something painful. The life she had spent decades building was no longer centered around her. Her children, once the core of her world, had their own families now. The friends she used to meet every weekend had slowly drifted away. And the career that once gave her identity, it was now just a memory. For the first time in her life, Helen felt irrelevant, forgotten, and utterly alone. At first, she resented this feeling. She waited for calls that never came. She checked her phone, hoping for invitations that never arrived. She wondered if she had done something wrong. If she had given too much to others and kept too little for herself. Then one day she had an epiphany. She asked herself, what if no one is coming to save me? What if this isn't a tragedy, but a chance to finally live for myself? So, she did something radical. Heavy check mark, she picked up a paintbrush for the first time in 40 years. Heavy check mark, she started selling her artwork online. Heavy check mark, she began traveling, meeting new people, and creating a life that was hers alone. And the most amazing part? Helen wasn't lonely anymore, because for the first time in her life, she was enough. Helen's story teaches us something profound. Most of us spend our lives waiting for approval that may never come. From childhood, we're trained to seek validation. Heavy check mark from teachers who grade us. Heavy check mark from parents who praise or scold us. Heavy check mark from bosses who reward or reject us. And this addiction to approval follows us into adulthood. We hesitate to take risks because we don't want to look foolish. We avoid speaking our minds because we fear judgment. We suppress our dreams because we don't want to disappoint others. But here's the truth. Nobody is keeping track of your failures as much as you think. Most people are too busy dealing with their own problems to analyze yours. They might notice your mistakes for a second, but within minutes, they've already moved on. So why are you still holding yourself back? Let me ask you something. If no one was watching, what would you do? At first, being overlooked feels painful. But what if irrelevance is actually a superpower? Think about it. Heavy check mark, when people stop expecting things from you, you can finally do what you want. Heavy check mark, when society no longer defines your worth, you are free to define it for yourself. Heavy check mark, when the spotlight fades, you can finally stop performing and start living. Imagine how much lighter life would feel if you no longer cared about. Because here's the truth. The greatest freedom comes from no longer needing to be seen. Your next chapter starts now. Let me leave you with one final thought. If you're feeling lost, overlooked, or disconnected from the life you once had, I want you to ask yourself this. What if this is your opportunity to finally live for yourself? Not for your children, not for society, not for approval, just for you. What if this is your moment to break free? Remember Helen? She thought she had reached the end of her story, But in reality, she was just turning the page. Now it's your turn. So I ask you, what will you do with this freedom? Part 1. The myth of constant scrutiny. The myth of constant scrutiny. Why no one is watching as much as you think. Are they really watching you? Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt like all eyes were on you? Maybe it was a new job, a family gathering, or even just a simple trip to the grocery store. You adjusted your posture, second-guessed your outfit, and carefully chose every word, because deep down, you were convinced that people were observing, analyzing, and silently judging your every move. But let's pause for a second. What if I told you that nobody actually cares as much as you think? I don't mean that in a harsh way, but in a liberating one. People are not watching your every move because they are too busy dealing with their own lives. They're thinking about their own insecurities, their own worries, their own little mistakes that they believe everyone else is noticing. So if everyone is caught up in their own world, then who really has time to constantly judge yours? The moment you thought would haunt you forever. Let me take you back to a moment from my own life. Years ago, I was giving a presentation in front of a large audience. I had prepared for weeks, but halfway through, I lost my train of thought. My mind went blank, completely blank. I stood there, frozen. My heart pounded. I felt every second stretching into eternity. I was certain that everyone in that room would remember this mistake forever. That they would leave the room whispering, laughing, shaking their heads at my incompetence. And YET.do, you know what happened? Nothing. People went on with their day. By the next morning, they had already forgotten. And even if they remembered for a moment, it was likely a passing thought, lost in the sea of their own responsibilities and distractions. But here's the crazy part. I didn't forget. For weeks, I replayed that moment in my head, over and over. I let it define me, not because other people cared, but because I did. And that's when I realized something. The fear of judgment is far worse than judgment itself. Why we believe the world is watching. This idea that the world is constantly watching and judging us comes from deep within our psychology. From childhood, we're trained to seek approval. Heavy checkmark, we raise our hands in class, hoping for the teacher's validation. Heavy checkmark, we adjust our behavior based on how our parents react. Heavy checkmark, we choose careers, relationships, even hobbies that we think will make us look good in the eyes of others. And social media has only magnified this. We share the best moments of our lives, carefully filtered and curated, because we think people are paying attention. But let's be honest, how much time do you spend analyzing someone else's life? Maybe a few seconds before you scroll past. That's exactly what others do too. And yet, we hesitate. We hold back. Not because of real judgment, but because of the fear of it. The forgotten criticism, a story from the Olympics. Let's talk about something bigger than a work presentation. Something played out on the world stage. During the 2016 Olympics, American gymnast Simone Biles, one of the greatest athletes in history, made a rare mistake in one of her routines. She lost her balance on the beam, something unheard of for a gymnast of her caliber. Cameras zoomed in. Commentators analyzed. For a brief moment, people talked about it. And then, they moved on. By the next day, headlines had shifted to other events. Within a week, no one even mentioned it anymore. But if you ask Simone Biles, she probably remembers that moment vividly. She might have replayed it 1,000 times in her head. And that's the truth. People forget far quicker than we do. So the question is, if no one else is holding on to your mistakes, why are you? The weight you choose to carry. Imagine walking through life with a backpack. Every time you fear judgment, you pick up a rock and place it inside. Each hesitation, each self-doubt, each moment you hold yourself back because of what they might say. Another rock. Now, imagine carrying that weight for years. But here's the thing, most of those rocks are imaginary. If you emptied the backpack, you would feel lighter. If you stopped believing that people are keeping track of your every move, you would move faster, freer, and with more confidence. What would you do if no one was watching? So now, let me ask you, if you truly believed no one was watching, what would you do differently? Would you finally take that risk? Would you speak your mind more freely? Would you start the business, write the book, chase the dream? Because here's the secret. The world is not waiting for you to fail. It's not keeping score the way you think it is. People are too busy living their own lives to carefully track yours. So why let the fear of judgment hold you back from truly living? The only opinion that matters. Does this mean we should ignore all feedback? Not at all. Growth comes from listening, learning, and improving. But here's the key. Only take advice from people who are truly invested in your success. Heavy check mark if someone who has never built anything tells you your idea will fail. Ignore them. Heavy check mark if someone who has never stepped on a stage tells you that you shouldn't speak. Why listen? Heavy check mark if someone who isn't brave enough to chase their dreams tells you yours are impossible. Walk away. The people who matter. The ones who genuinely want the best for you. Will never try to hold you back out of judgment. They will push you forward out of love. So the next time you hesitate because of what they might think, ask yourself, who are they, really? And more importantly, do they even matter? Your next step, letting go of the spotlight that never existed. Let's do something together. Take a deep breath. Think about one thing you've been afraid to do because of what others might say. Now ask yourself, if I believed no one was watching, would I do it? If the answer is yes, then do it anyway. Because the truth is, nobody is watching as closely as you think. And if you let go of that fear, you might just discover a life far richer, freer, and more fulfilling than you ever imagined. So what will you do now that you know? The world is moving forward. Are you ready to move with it? Part 2, Why Irrelevance is a Superpower. Why irrelevance is a superpower. The fear of being forgotten. Have you ever felt invisible? Like the world has moved on, and somehow you were left standing in place? Maybe it happened after a career change. Maybe after retirement. Or maybe it was in the quiet moments. When you realized that the people who once needed you so much no longer do. It's unsettling, isn't it? Society teaches us to fear irrelevance. We chase accomplishments, validation, and social status because we believe that to be seen is to be valuable. But what if we have it all wrong? What if irrelevance isn't a loss, but a gift? What if, instead of clinging to the need to be important, we embraced the freedom that comes with being unnoticed? Because here's the truth. When no one is watching, you are free to be whoever you want to be. The moment you stop playing by their rules. Think of all the things you never tried because you were afraid of what people would say. Maybe you wanted to switch careers, but you stayed because starting over seemed foolish. Maybe you wanted to write a book, but you feared people would think it wasn't good enough. Maybe you wanted to live a simpler, slower life, but you worried others would see it as giving up. We shape our lives around this invisible audience. Constantly performing, constantly seeking approval. But what happens when the audience leaves? Most people see that as a tragedy, a sign that they are no longer relevant. But those who understand the power of irrelevance see it as a second chance. Because when no one expects anything from you, you finally have the freedom to reinvent yourself. The woman who started over at 70. Let me tell you about Helen. For 40 years, Helen was everything to everyone. Mother, wife, caretaker, problem solver. Her life revolved around others, and for a long time that made her happy. But then, things changed. Her children grew up and had their own families. Her husband passed away. The phone calls became less frequent. And one day, she woke up to the quiet realization that she was no longer needed. First, she felt lost, forgotten, irrelevant. She spent months mourning the life she once had, replaying memories of a time when she mattered. But then, one morning, she asked herself a simple question. If no one is expecting anything from me, what do I want to do? And for the first time in her life, she had no reason to hold back the answer. She wanted to paint. As a child, she loved it. But somewhere along the way, between responsibilities and obligations, she let it go. Now, with no one watching, no one judging, no one expecting anything, she picked up a paintbrush again. First, she was terrible, but no one was there to tell her that. So she kept going. She started painting every day, just for the joy of it. Eventually, she got better. She shared her work online. People loved it. Within a year, she was selling her paintings. Within 2, she had built a business. And more importantly, she had never been happier, because for the first time, she wasn't living for anyone else. She was living for herself. The lesson of reinvention. Helen's story is powerful because it reminds us that life doesn't end when people stop paying attention to us. In fact, that's often when it truly begins. Imagine if Helen had seen irrelevance as a punishment. Imagine if she had spent her days mourning the past instead of building a new future. She would have missed out on the best years of her life. And the truth is, many people do. They let the fear of being forgotten keep them from exploring what else is possible. But those who embrace irrelevance, who see it as an opportunity instead of a loss, discover something incredible. When no one is watching, you are free to fail. When no one is judging, you are free to experiment. When no one is expecting, you are free to change. And that is true freedom, the art of living for yourself. So let me ask you, what would you do if no one cared? If there was no audience, no expectations, no pressure? Would you start that project? Move to that city? Take that risk? Would you finally allow yourself to live the way you want? Because the truth is, you don't need permission. Not from your family, not from society, not from the invisible audience in your mind. You are already free. The only question is, what will you do with that freedom? Part 3. Stop seeking approval. It's holding you back. The invisible chains of approval. Have you ever caught yourself waiting? Waiting for someone to tell you that you're good enough, that you're on the right path, that your choices make sense. Maybe it's your boss, your parents, your friends, or even strangers on the internet. We all do it. We've been trained to. From the moment we're born, we're told what is acceptable and what is not. As children, we seek approval from our parents. As students, we seek validation from teachers. As adults, we look to society, chasing promotions, social media likes, and the silent nod of approval from people who barely know us. But here's the problem. The pursuit of approval never ends. No matter how much you achieve, there will always be another level, another expectation, another person whose validation you think you need. And if you live your life waiting for permission to be yourself, you will always be at the mercy of others. So let me ask you, who are you living for? The price of seeking approval. Think about all the times you held back because you were afraid of what people might say. Maybe you wanted to start a business, but someone told you it was risky. Maybe you loved painting, but a teacher once said you weren't talented enough. Maybe you dreamed of traveling the world, but everyone told you it wasn't practical. So you stayed. You played it safe. Because deep down, you were afraid that if you followed your own path and failed, the world would laugh. But here's the truth. Most people aren't thinking about you as much as you believe. They're too busy worrying about their own lives, their own insecurities, their own silent battles. And even if they do judge you, so what? Their opinion won't change your reality. Only your choices will. The genius who disappeared. Let me tell you a story about one of the greatest minds in history. Leonardo da Vinci. Most people know him as the artist behind the Mona Lisa or the Last Supper. But what they don't realize is that for years, he simply vanished. While other artists were seeking recognition, Da Vinci stepped away. He spent years experimenting, failing, and learning in complete obscurity. He didn't care about approval. He cared about mastery. And when he finally returned, he revealed some of the most groundbreaking works of art and science the world had ever seen. That is real power, not needing to be seen, but choosing when to reveal your greatness. Imagine if he had spent those years seeking approval instead of honing his craft. Would we still remember his name? The quiet power of not caring. There's something incredible that happens when you stop seeking approval. And the irony? The moment you stop needing approval is the moment people start respecting you more. Because confidence is magnetic. Independence is rare. And those who walk their own path, unapologetically, become the people others admire. What could you create if you stopped worrying? Think about it. If you weren't afraid of judgment, what would you do? If you weren't waiting for permission, what would you start? If no one's opinion mattered but your own, how would you live? Because the truth is, you don't need anyone to tell you it's okay to be yourself. It's your life. And the only validation you ever needed was your own. Part 4. The truth about relationships in old age. The truth about relationships in old age. The silent expectation we all carry. Have you ever found yourself waiting for a call that never came? A text message that stayed unread? A visit that was always postponed? Maybe it was from your children, your lifelong friends, or someone you once poured your heart into. And as time passed, you started wondering, do they still care? Do I still matter? We don't talk about this often, but deep inside, many of us carry an unspoken expectation that the people we love will always be there. That after years of sacrifice, raising children, supporting family, and being there for friends, they will naturally return the favor. But life doesn't always work that way. People move on. Their lives get busy. And sometimes, without meaning to, they forget. And when that happens, it's easy to feel hurt, forgotten, unimportant. But what if I told you that this feeling, this quiet pain of being left behind, is not a loss, but an invitation? An invitation to let go of expectations and take back control of your own happiness. Robert's story, the father who let go. Let me tell you about Robert. Robert was a devoted father, a retired teacher, and someone who had spent his whole life giving. He had always imagined his retirement as a time when his children would visit often, when family gatherings would fill his home with laughter, when old friends would drop by for coffee like they used to. But reality was different. His children, now with their own families, had little time. Friends had moved to different cities, and his once vibrant home grew quieter with each passing year. At first, he resented it. He waited by the phone, replaying old memories, wondering if he had done something wrong. But one day, as he sat alone at his kitchen table, he had a realization. I can either keep waiting for others to make me happy, or I can choose to make myself happy. And so Robert made a decision. Heavy check mark, he stopped expecting others to fill his happiness. Heavy check mark, he signed up for a travel group and explored places he had always dreamed of. Heavy check mark, he took up photography and started capturing the beauty of everyday life. Heavy check mark, he formed new friendships with people who shared his passions. And something incredible happened. He became happier than ever. Not because his children suddenly visited more. Not because his friends started calling every day. But because he stopped waiting. He let go of expectations and took responsibility for his own joy. And in doing so, he found a sense of freedom he had never known before. The illusion of entitlement in relationships. Many of us believe that because we gave so much, we are owed something in return. But relationships are not transactions. Love, care, and attention are not debts to be repaid. They are gifts we give freely. And the moment we expect something in return, we turn love into a burden. Think about it. When was the last time you did something for someone without expecting anything back? That kind of love is rare, but it's also the only kind of love that truly sets us free. Because when you love without expectation, you are never disappointed. You give because it fills your heart, not because you want something in exchange. And that is a powerful way to live, shifting from expectation to appreciation. So what if, instead of feeling hurt by what we don't receive, we started appreciating what we do? Instead of counting the days between visits, we cherish the moments when they happen. Instead of resenting the calls that never come, we enjoy the conversations when they do. Instead of focusing on who isn't there, we embrace the people who are. Because happiness isn't about who shows up for you. It's about how you show up for yourself. What this means for you. If you're feeling alone, forgotten, or disappointed in the people you once expected more from, take a deep breath and then ask yourself, what can I do today to bring joy into my own life? Could be learning something new. Could be meeting new people. Could be revisiting an old passion that once made you feel alive. Because the truth is, no one is responsible for your happiness but you. And when you stop waiting for others to make you happy, you unlock a life that is rich, fulfilling, and completely your own. So what will you do with this freedom? Part 5. Embrace the freedom to reinvent yourself. Embrace the freedom to reinvent yourself. The moment you realize you're free, imagine waking up one day and realizing that no one is waiting for you to prove anything. No one is keeping track of your failures. No one is watching your every move. No one is expecting you to be who you were yesterday. First, that thought might scare you. It might feel like a loss, like you've been left behind. But what if it was actually a gift? What if, instead of feeling abandoned by expectations, you were liberated from them? Because here's the truth. You are free. You don't owe the world a version of yourself that no longer feels right. You don't have to keep following a path that no longer inspires you. You are not locked into your past choices, your old mistakes, or even your previous successes. You can start over at any moment. Why reinvention is a superpower. Think about it. Who told you that you have to be the same person you were last year? Society loves to put people in boxes. Tells us, heavy check mark if you're a doctor, you should stay a doctor. Heavy check mark if you've always been quiet, you should stay quiet. Heavy check mark if you made a mistake in the past, you should never outgrow it. But life isn't meant to be lived in one version. The most alive people are the ones who give themselves permission to evolve. They change careers in their 50s. They learn new skills in their 60s. They fall in love with life again in their 70s. They refuse to let the world decide when they're done growing. And the moment you accept that change isn't failure, but freedom, everything shifts. The man who became a painter at 80. Let me tell you about John. For 40 years, John worked as an accountant. He was good at it, but it wasn't his passion. Every morning, he woke up, put on a suit, and lived a life that felt predictable. He told himself he didn't mind. After all, he had a family to support. Stability mattered. But deep down, he had always dreamed of being an artist. He used to sketch as a child, but as he grew older, that dream was buried under responsibilities and practical choices. When he retired at 65, he felt empty. He had done everything right, but something was missing. One day, he picked up a paintbrush, just for fun, just to see. He was terrible at first. His hands weren't steady. His colors were all wrong, but he kept going. By the time he turned 80, John had created hundreds of paintings. He sold some, gifted some, and kept many for himself. But the most beautiful part? He never cared if they were perfect. He just painted because it made him feel alive. And for the first time in decades, he felt like he was living for himself. What's stopping you? Now, you might be thinking, that's great for John, but I don't have time to reinvent myself. I'm too old. I'm too set in my ways. I don't even know where to begin. But let me ask you this. What's the alternative? Spending another decade feeling stuck? Waking up every day doing things that no longer bring you joy? Telling yourself that you could have started something new, but never actually doing it? The truth is, the only thing standing between you and the life you want is your belief that it's too late. And it's not. It never is. Practical steps to reinvent yourself today. You don't have to change everything overnight, but you can start with small, deliberate choices that bring you back to yourself. Here are 4 things you can do right now. White heavy check mark. Stop apologizing for taking up space. You are allowed to exist fully without shrinking yourself for others. Your dreams, your voice, your presence. They matter. You don't need permission to live the way you want. White heavy check mark. Try something new without worrying about judgment. Do something just for the joy of it. Write, paint, dance, travel. Fail, learn, try again. You don't need to be great at it. You just need to start. White heavy check mark. Let go of relationships that drain you. If someone makes you feel small, if they only show up when they need something, if they don't support your growth, it's okay to walk away. Surround yourself with people who uplift you. White heavy check mark. Create something meaningful. It doesn't have to be a masterpiece. It just has to be something that comes from your heart. A small project, a new hobby, a routine that makes you feel good. Create for you, not for approval. Imagine waking up every day free. Close your eyes for a second. Imagine waking up in the morning with nothing to prove. No need to impress anyone. No need to justify your choices. No need to be who you were yesterday. Just pure freedom. To learn, to grow, to try, to live. How would that feel? Because the truth is that freedom is already yours. You just have to claim it. So tell me, who do you want to become? This journey of self-liberation isn't just for the forgotten. It's for anyone ready to stop living for others and start living for themselves. If this message resonated with you, let's spread this awakening. Sparkles like this video if you're ready to embrace your freedom. Comment below and tell me what is one thing you would do if no one was watching. Share this with someone who needs to hear this today. And of course, subscribe to Lotus Light Teachings so we can continue this journey together. Because your next chapter begins now.